They say the cruelest words come from those we love most. On the day I signed my divorce papers after 35 years of marriage, my daughter looked me in the eyes and said, "You're pathetic, Dad. No decent woman will ever want you again. You're going to die alone." Her words buried me alive that day in the Charleston courthouse. But destiny has a wicked sense of humor. 6 months later, at my daughter's lavish wedding, I returned, not as the broken man who fled town on an overnight bus, but hand in hand with my 28-year-old billionaire fiancé. The moment my daughter recognized who stood beside me, her face drained of all color. What she didn't know was that they had met before in a conversation that would shatter all our lives and rebuild them in ways none of us could have imagined. This is a story about forgiveness when it seems impossible, about finding love when you've been told you're unlovable, and about the mysterious white candles that somehow connected all our broken pieces. If you've ever been told you're too old, too damaged, or too far gone for a second chance, this story is for you. Follow our channel for more stories that will break your heart and heal it again. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from. That day, my daughter didn't need a coffin to bury me. Her words were enough. It was a cloudy afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind where the humidity hangs in the air like grief. The courthouse was packed with strangers going about their business, oblivious to the fact that a man was dying right in front of them. Not physically, though my chest felt tight enough that I wondered if this might be what a heart attack feels like, but in every way that matters. I was 57 years old, signing divorce papers that ended my 35-year marriage to Eleanor. 35 years, the same oak desk in our living room where I'd helped Megan with her science projects, the same blue coffee mug I drank from every morning, the same woman I'd promised forever to when we were too young to understand what forever meant. Initial here, Mr. Thompson. And here. And here. The clerk's voice sounded distant, like I was underwater. Eleanor sat beside me, her posture perfect as always, not a blonde hair out of place despite the humidity. She didn't look at me, hadn't really looked at me in years. Our marriage hadn't ended with shouting or accusations. It had died in silence, a slow, quiet suffocation where we'd eventually stopped even arguing. That's the worst kind of death, when you don't even fight for the patient. That's when I saw Megan walk in, my little girl, except she wasn't little anymore. 32 years old with her mother's golden hair and what used to be my smile. She didn't smile today. "You couldn't even wait until after my wedding next month," she hissed, standing over us with arms crossed. "You had to ruin that too?" I reached for the envelope I'd prepared, a check for her wedding, more than I could afford. But I wanted to give her something special, something to show that despite everything, I still loved her, still wanted to be her father. "Megan, honey, I wanted to give you this for the wedding. She snatched the envelope from my trembling hands and tore it open right there. The check fluttered to the floor between us. Her eyes went cold in a way I'd never seen before. "You think money fixes this?" Her voice rose, drawing stares from around the courthouse. "You're pathetic, Dad. A complete failure. Mom was right about you all along." Eleanor said nothing, just stared at her designer purse. "You couldn't keep your marriage together, you couldn't keep your job, you couldn't even keep our respect." Megan's voice was surgical, precise in its cruelty. "You're a sad old man and no decent woman will ever want you again. You're going to die alone, and you know what? You deserve it." Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. The clerk looked down at her papers. Eleanor adjusted her watch. A janitor mopped the same spot near the water fountain, pretending not to hear. I'd been invisible for years in my marriage, but this was different. This was being erased. The check remained on the floor as I stood, legs unsteady. My throat closed up so tight I couldn't speak. I just walked, past the security guard who averted his eyes, past the young couple filing for a marriage license with hopeful smiles, past the sunlight streaming through the grand entrance of the courthouse. I walked for hours until Charleston's historic district gave way to neighborhoods I didn't recognize. My phone buzzed twice, then stopped. Not Megan, not Eleanor, just my sister Judith, who didn't know yet what had happened. I found myself at the bus station as evening fell, staring at the departure board. New York, Atlanta, Greensboro, places where nobody knew Gregory Thompson, the failure, places where I could disappear. I bought a ticket for the overnight bus to Greensboro with the last of the cash in my wallet. No plan, no luggage except the small duffel bag I'd packed that morning, knowing I wouldn't be going back to the house that wasn't mine anymore. As the bus pulled away from Charleston, I watched the city lights recede. The city where I'd proposed to Eleanor at Fort Sumter, where I'd held newborn Megan in my arms at St. Francis Hospital, where I'd built a life that had crumbled so completely, there wasn't even dust left to gather. "You all right there, mister?" The woman across the aisle was elderly, with kind eyes and hands spotted with age. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "You don't look all right," she said simply. "But that's okay. Nobody is, really." She went back to her knitting. It was midnight when we reached Greensboro. I stepped off the bus into a strange city, with no destination and no purpose. I walked until I found a small park with a bench, and that's where I spent my first night as a man with no future. But there was something about that first morning in Greensboro. Something about the way the mist hung over the old brick buildings. Something about the small church across from my bench with its weathered stone steps. And something about the slender figure of a woman I noticed the next morning, placing a single white candle on those steps. I didn't know it then, but that candle was the first light in what had become a very dark life, and the woman who lit it would change everything. But not in any way I could have possibly imagined. Every morning she was there, like clockwork, as the first hints of sunrise brushed against the red brick of St. Michael's Church. A slender figure in a simple gray dress that seemed to belong to another era, her movements deliberate and reverent. Always the same routine. A white candle placed carefully on the third step, a hand-embroidered handkerchief laid beside it, and then a long, silent gaze into the locked church doors. I watched her from my bench across the small square, nursing a styrofoam cup of cheap coffee from the diner that took pity on me after my third night sleeping in the park. The owner, a gruff man named Lou, had offered me a job washing dishes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a room at the boarding house 2 blocks away. A room with peeling wallpaper and a mattress that sagged in the middle. But it was mine. Or at least, it was for now. She never cried. Not with sounds anyway. But there was something in the set of her shoulders that spoke of a grief so profound it had moved beyond tears. I recognized it because I carried the same weight. Grief that had become so familiar it was now a part of you. Like an extra limb you'd grown accustomed to dragging around. The summer heat in Greensboro was oppressive that August. The kind that made your shirt stick to your back before you'd even finished your morning coffee. But she never seemed affected by it. Her dark hair was always perfectly arranged in a simple bun, not a strand out of place. There was something timeless about her, as if she'd stepped out of an old photograph. I don't know why I noticed when she forgot the handkerchief. Perhaps because it disrupted the ritual I'd been observing for weeks. She'd placed the candle, bowed her head briefly, and then walked away with a slightly quicker pace than usual. The small square of fabric remained on the church step, a forgotten piece of her mysterious grief. I waited until she was well out of sight before crossing the square. I told myself I was just being helpful, a good citizen picking up something someone had dropped. But the truth was, I was desperate for a connection to something, anything, in this new, empty life I'd fashioned for myself. The handkerchief was soft cotton, clearly handmade, with delicate embroidery in one corner. Perdonare est vivere. My Latin was rusty from high school, but I remembered enough. Forgive to live. Or perhaps, forgiving is living. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket, feeling oddly like I'd stolen something intimate. The next morning I arrived earlier than usual and sat with the handkerchief in my hand, turning it over and over like a worry stone. When she appeared, her steps faltered slightly. She placed the candle, then stood for a moment, her hand moving to the pocket of her dress, where she likely expected to find her handkerchief. I saw a flash of distress cross her face, the first real emotion I'd witnessed in all these weeks of watching. I stood up on legs, stiff from sitting too long, and approached slowly, as one might approach a deer in the woods. "Excuse me," I said, my voice rusty from disuse. "I think you dropped this yesterday." She turned, and for the first time, I saw her face clearly. She was younger than I'd thought, perhaps late 20s or early 30s, but her eyes belonged to someone who had lived several lifetimes. Dark, deep-set, with the kind of weariness that comes from carrying something heavy for far too long. "Thank you," she said, taking the handkerchief with slender fingers. Her voice was soft, but clear, with the faintest trace of what might have been a southern accent, smoothed out by education or travel. And then, something miraculous happened. She smiled. Just briefly, a small upward turn of the lips that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, but it transformed her face completely, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "I'm Evelyn," she said simply, clutching the handkerchief. Gregory, I replied, surprising myself by using my real name. I'd been introducing myself as Greg to everyone in Greensboro, trying to leave behind the man who had failed so completely in Charleston. She nodded once as if confirming something to herself, then turned back to her candle. I took the hint and retreated to my bench, expecting that to be the end of our interaction. But the next day, she nodded to me when she arrived. And the day after that, she asked if I'd like to join her on the church steps. We sat in companionable silence, watching the candle flame flicker in the morning breeze. No questions about why I was there every day. No prying into each other's lives. Just two broken people finding comfort in shared silence. For weeks, we communicated mostly through glances and small gestures. A nod, a half smile. Once, she brought an extra cup of coffee and placed it wordlessly beside me on the step. It was black and bitter and perfect. I learned to read the subtle changes in her demeanor. The days when her shoulders were more rigid, when the candle was placed with trembling hands. The rare mornings when her steps were lighter, when she might linger a few minutes longer than usual. What was it about this woman that drew me back to that church every day? It wasn't romance. I was too hollowed out for such feelings, too aware of the gulf of years between us. Perhaps it was recognition. In her careful rituals, her quiet dignity and grief, I saw someone else who understood what it meant to lose everything that defined you. Or perhaps it was simpler than that. Perhaps in a world where I had become invisible, it was the miracle of being seen. She told me everything on a rainy Sunday, the kind of southern downpour that turns the world into a watercolor painting, all blurred edges and muted sounds. The rain had started before dawn, drumming against the tin awning of my boarding house until I gave up on sleep and made my way to St. Michael's earlier than usual. I didn't expect to see her there. Not in this weather. Not with the church steps slick with rain, impossible to light a candle. But there she was, standing under a black umbrella, staring at the church doors with the same intensity as always. Her gray dress was darker at the hem where the rain had soaked it, and water ran in rivulets down her leather boots. She held an unlit candle in her hand, turning it over and over as if trying to solve a puzzle. "It won't light," she said without turning as I approached, sensing my presence somehow. "Not today." I stood beside her, sharing the shelter of her umbrella, though it meant standing closer than we ever had before. I could smell lavender and something else. Old books, perhaps. The scent of someone who spent time in libraries and quiet places. "Maybe that's okay," I offered. "To miss a day." She shook her head, the movement so slight I almost missed it. 312, she said quietly. "That's how many I've lit. One for each week since he died." It was the first personal detail she'd shared, and it hung between us like a delicate thread, one I was afraid would snap if I pulled too hard. But something about the rain, the closeness, the shared umbrella, it created a small world where secrets seemed safer. "Your husband?" I asked, immediately regretting the assumption when I saw her expression. "My father," she corrected, no judgment in her voice. She looked down at the unlit candle. "James Wells, hotel magnate, philanthropist, tyrant." The last word was spoken so softly, I almost didn't hear it over the rain. She gestured to a nearby coffee shop, its windows fogged with condensation. "Would you like to get out of the rain? I could use something warm." The cafe was nearly empty, just a barista wiping down counters and an elderly couple sharing a newspaper in the corner. We chose a table by the window where we could still see the church across the square. She ordered a plain black coffee. I did the same, though I longed for something stronger. Whiskey, perhaps. Something to burn away the chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "I was supposed to inherit the family business," she began after a long silence, her fingers wrapped around the white ceramic mug. "The Wells Hotel Group, 37 properties across the country. My father built it from nothing, starting with a rundown motel in Savannah when he was just 22. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the rain-streaked window. "I was an only child. His pride and joy, he called me, until I wasn't." Her voice held no bitterness, just a matter-of-fact quality that made it all the more heartbreaking. "I was 18 when I told him I wanted to study art history instead of business. He gave me an ultimatum: follow the path he'd laid out or be cut off. I chose art." The rain drummed harder against the windows, creating a strange intimacy in our corner of the cafe. Her words flowed more freely now, as if a dam had broken somewhere inside her. "He disinherited me that same day, told me I was dead to him. I finished college on scholarships and working 3 jobs. Never spoke to him again. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. 6 years later, he had a heart attack in the penthouse suite of his flagship hotel in New York. My mother had died when I was 10, so there was no one else. Just him, alone. She fell silent for a moment, and I found myself holding my breath, afraid to break the spell of her confidence. I missed the funeral, she continued. I was in Florence for a research fellowship when I got the news. By the time I made it back, he was already buried. So I started lighting candles instead. One every Sunday with a prayer that someday he'll forgive me. For what? I asked, genuinely confused. You were just following your heart. She looked at me then, really looked at me, with those ancient eyes in her young face. For not being there at the end, for letting pride keep us apart, for not finding a way to make him understand that loving art didn't mean I didn't love him. The confession hung between us, raw and honest. It was my turn now, I realized. She had opened a door and I could choose to walk through it or remain safely behind my own walls. My daughter told me I'd die alone, I said, the words scraping my throat on their way out. The day I signed my divorce papers, she said no decent woman would ever want me again. Evelyn didn't offer empty reassurances or platitudes. She just nodded, acknowledging the pain without trying to diminish it. Do you believe her? She asked finally. I considered lying, but what was the point? Some days, most days. And what brought you to Greensboro, of all places? It was the next bus leaving Charleston, I admitted. I just needed to disappear. She nodded again, as if this made perfect sense. Perhaps to her it did. We sat in silence as our coffees grew cold, listening to the rain and watching occasional pedestrians hurry past with umbrellas and hunched shoulders. It was strange how much lighter I felt, having spoken my shame out loud, having someone hear it and not flinch away. A week later, at an antique market I'd started visiting on my days off from the diner, I found a simple brass candle holder. It wasn't expensive, just a few dollars from a table of miscellaneous items the seller seemed eager to be rid of. But it was solid and well made, with a patina that spoke of years of use. The following Sunday, I brought it to the church steps. Evelyn was already there, her white candle in hand. For the candles yet to come, I said simply, offering her the brass holder. Her smile that morning was like sunrise breaking over the ocean, slow, radiant, transforming everything it touched. And I, a broken old man cast aside by his family, felt something stir within my chest that I thought had died in that Charleston courthouse. Hope, fragile as a candle flame, but burning all the same. Autumn in Greensboro painted the world in amber and rust. Leaves crunched beneath my feet as I made my way to our bench. Yes, ours now, in front of St. Michael's. 3 months had passed since I'd stepped off that bus with nothing but a duffel bag and the weight of my daughter's contempt. 3 months of dawn meetings with Evelyn, of candlelight and quiet conversations, of slowly rebuilding something like a life from the ashes of my old one. I'd moved from dishwasher to short-order cook at Lou's Diner. The raise allowed me to buy a second-hand suit from the Salvation Army store. Navy blue, slightly worn at the elbows but still dignified. I wore it today, feeling both foolish and hopeful as I approached our usual meeting spot. Evelyn wasn't there. Instead, a small envelope rested on the bench, my name written in her elegant script. Inside was a note asking me to meet her at the Weatherspoon Art Museum at noon. No explanation, just an address and a gentle command. Wear your blue suit. The museum was housed in a modern building on the university campus, all glass and clean lines. I felt out of place among the college students with their backpacks and casual confidence, but I straightened my tie, also secondhand, and made my way inside. She was waiting in a gallery of abstract paintings, standing before a canvas of violent red slashes against a black background. The gallery was empty except for us, our footsteps echoing on the polished floor. "Do you like it?" she asked without turning, sensing my presence as she always did. I studied the painting, trying to see what she saw. "It makes me uncomfortable," I admitted, "but I think that's the point." She nodded, pleased with my answer. "It's called Rage Contained. The artist painted it after losing his wife to cancer. He said he needed somewhere to put all that anger where it wouldn't destroy him. I understood that need all too well. The search for containers large enough to hold our broken pieces. "Why are we here, Evelyn?" I asked gently. She turned to face me then, and I was struck by how different she looked. Her hair was down today, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She wore a simple burgundy dress instead of her usual gray, and there was a brightness in her eyes I'd never seen before. "I wanted you to see me here," she said, "in my world. Before I ask you something important." She led me through the galleries, stopping at paintings and sculptures, explaining techniques and historical contexts with the easy authority of someone deeply knowledgeable. This was her element, I realized. This was what she'd chosen over her father's empire. We ended in a small courtyard garden at the center of the museum. A fountain burbled quietly, and late roses still bloomed against a stone wall. She gestured for me to sit on a bench, then, to my absolute shock, she knelt on one knee before me. "Gregory Thompson," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "Will you marry me?" I laughed. I couldn't help it. A short, disbelieving bark that echoed off the courtyard walls. Her expression didn't change, and I realized with growing amazement that she was serious. "Evelyn, I'm 30 years older than you," I said, my voice hoarse. "I have nothing to offer. No money, no career, not even a decent place to live. And my own daughter thinks I know what your daughter thinks," she interrupted. "And I know what society thinks about a woman my age with a man yours. I don't care about any of that." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. "This was my grandfather's," she said. "He married my grandmother when he was 58 and she was 25. They had 42 happy years together." My mind raced with all the reasons this was impossible, irresponsible, doomed to fail. But beneath the panic, a quieter voice whispered, "Why not? What do you have to lose that hasn't already been taken?" "There's something I haven't told you," she said, still kneeling. "Something important. Here it comes," I thought. The catch, the revelation that would make sense of this surreal proposal. "My grandmother left me controlling interest in Wells Hotel Group when she died last year," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "She never approved of how my father treated me. The shares were held in trust until my 30th birthday, which was last month. I've been in meetings with lawyers and the board for weeks. That's why I've missed our morning meetings sometimes." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. You own your father's hotels now?" She nodded, a small wry smile playing at her lips. "Ironic, isn't it? I finally inherited the empire I never wanted." She took my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "But I've decided to accept it, to rebuild it based on different values. Values like compassion, forgiveness, second chances." Her eyes held mine. "Values I see in you every day." My head spun. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to men like me. "Why me?" I whispered. "Because you gave me a candle holder for candles yet to come," she said simply. "Because you see me, not as an heiress or a rebellious daughter or a prestigious name, but as Evelyn. Just Evelyn." She squeezed my hand. "And because I love you, Gregory Thompson. I love the way you listen. The way you notice everything but judge nothing. The way you've built a new life from scratch without bitterness or revenge." A student walked through the courtyard, glanced at us curiously, then continued on. The world kept turning, oblivious to the earthquake happening in my heart. "You don't have to answer now," she said, standing and sitting beside me on the bench. "Take some time to think about it." 2 weeks later, as October faded into November, a crisp white envelope arrived at my boarding house. Inside was an invitation to Megan's wedding, addressed to Mr. Gregory Thompson and guest. No personal note, no acknowledgement of our estrangement. Just a formal invitation that might have been sent to any distant acquaintance. I showed it to Evelyn that evening as we sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that put the museum's abstract canvases to shame. "Are you going to go?" she asked, her head resting against my shoulder. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to see her, to try to make peace somehow. But I'm afraid of what she'll say, or afraid of what you'll feel. Both, I suppose." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, tracing patterns on the back of my hand with her finger. "What if we went together?" she suggested finally. "You could introduce me as your fiancé." I turned to look at her, searching for any hint of hesitation or doubt. Found none. "You're sure? It won't be pleasant. My ex-wife will be there and all her family who've decided I'm the villain in our story." She smiled, that sunrise smile that still made my heart skip. "I'm sure. Besides," she added with a mischievous glint in her eye, "I think I'd like to meet the woman who thinks you'll never find love again." I kissed her then, marveling at how this broken old man had somehow found not just love, but a fierce and unexpected champion. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Evelyn had already sent her RSVP to the wedding, and she had deliberately left the sender's information blank. A ghost RSVP that would arrive at Megan's door like a message in a bottle with no origin point. The stage was set for a confrontation none of us was prepared for. The Wells Charleston Grand Hotel rose like a gleaming sentinel over the harbor, its glass and limestone facade reflecting the December sunlight. I hadn't been back to Charleston since that fateful day at the courthouse, and now here I was, returning not as the broken man who fled, but as the fiancé of the woman who owned this magnificent building, and 36 others like it across the country. "Are you okay?" Evelyn squeezed my hand as our taxi pulled up to the entrance. She looked stunning in a simple emerald dress that complemented her dark hair, wearing only a pair of pearl earrings and the engagement ring I'd finally given her, a modest band that had belonged to my grandmother. She'd refused to let me replace it with something more befitting her station. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. My heart hammered against my ribs like a prisoner desperate for escape. "It feels like walking back into a battlefield." Doormen in crisp uniforms rushed to open our doors. "Welcome to the Wells Charleston Grand, ma'am, sir," one said with practiced charm. Evelyn had deliberately kept our arrival low-key. Though she was now the CEO and majority shareholder of Wells Hotel Group, she rarely used her position to command special treatment. The lobby soared 3 stories high, with marble floors and crystal chandeliers that scattered light like diamonds. A massive floral arrangement dominated the center. White roses and lilies for the wedding. My daughter's wedding. The thought still seemed surreal. "Ms. Wells," a man in an impeccable suit approached us, his face a mask of professional deference tinged with genuine respect. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow's board meeting." "Hello, Richard," Evelyn greeted the hotel manager warmly. "I'm actually here as a guest today. This is my fiancé, Gregory Thompson." I watched the manager's eyes widen slightly. Whether at the word fiancé or at my obviously older appearance, I couldn't tell. To his credit, he recovered quickly, extending his hand to me. "A pleasure, Mr. Thompson. Any guest of Ms. Wells is, of course, our most honored guest." "Thank you," I replied, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "My daughter's getting married here today. Megan Richardson." Now the manager's expression shifted to one of genuine surprise. "The Richardson-Hayes wedding? Of course, it's our premier event today. The ceremony begins in an hour in the Palm Courtyard." We checked into our room, a palatial suite with views of the harbor that would have cost more than a month's salary from my former accounting job. Evelyn insisted we rest before the ceremony, but rest was impossible. I stood at the window, watching boats drift across the water, trying to quiet the storm in my chest. "Do you want to talk about what you'll say to her?" Evelyn asked, coming to stand beside me. I shook my head. I've rehearsed a dozen speeches in my head. None of them sound right. I turned to her, drinking in the sight of her. This impossible woman who had somehow chosen me. "Are you sure about this? There's still time to back out," she answered by straightening my tie and brushing an invisible speck from my shoulder. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said with that quiet certainty that was so uniquely Evelyn. The Palm Courtyard had been transformed into a winter wonderland, despite Charleston's mild December weather. White roses and crystal ice sculptures gleamed under string lights. Guests in formal attire mingled, champagne flutes in hand. I recognized faces from my old life. Eleanor's sister with her perpetual look of disapproval, colleagues from the accounting firm that had downsized me 2 years before the divorce, neighbors who had chosen sides when Eleanor and I separated. We found seats near the back, deliberately inconspicuous. I felt eyes on us, heard the low murmur of whispers. The prodigal father returns. And who is that young woman with him? A string quartet began to play, and the guests settled into their seats. The groom, Andrew Hayes, a cardiovascular surgeon I'd met only twice, took his place at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, his face eager with anticipation. And then the processional began, and my breath caught in my throat as Megan appeared at the far end of the aisle on her stepfather's arm. My little girl in white lace, her golden hair swept up, her mother's pearls at her throat. I hadn't been asked to walk her down the aisle. That honor had gone to Richard, Eleanor's second husband of 3 years, the man who had been her boss, then her friend, then more than a friend in the final years of our marriage. I felt Evelyn's hand slip into mine, anchoring me as emotions threatened to pull me under. Pride, grief, love, regret. They crashed over me in waves as Megan glided down the aisle, her eyes fixed on her future husband, never glancing in my direction, though I knew she'd been informed of my attendance. The ceremony was beautiful, of course. Megan had always had exquisite taste inherited from her mother. Vows were exchanged, rings placed on fingers, a kiss shared to applause. Through it all, I sat still as stone, a ghost at my own daughter's wedding. It was during the reception that everything changed. Guests mingled in the hotel's grand ballroom, a 5-piece band playing jazz standards on a raised platform. Evelyn and I kept to ourselves, making small talk with strangers who had no idea of the complicated history simmering beneath the surface of this elegant gathering. "There's something I should tell you," Evelyn whispered, her lips close to my ear as we stood near one of the elaborate buffet tables. "I've met Megan before." I turned to her, confusion furrowing my brow. "What? When?" Before she could answer, a voice came over the microphone. The master of ceremonies, a college friend of Andrew's. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have a very special guest with us today. The new CEO of Wells Hotel Group, which owns this beautiful venue, has joined us unexpectedly. Ms. Evelyn Wells, would you say a few words?" A spotlight swung wildly before finding us. Evelyn squeezed my hand once, then stepped forward, gracious despite the surprise. Conversations halted, all eyes turning toward her. "Thank you for the kind introduction," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I'm delighted to be here celebrating with Megan and Andrew." She paused, then added, "Especially as I'm here accompanying my fiancé, Gregory Thompson, Megan's father." The ballroom went absolutely still. I could hear the ice clinking in glasses, the distant sound of kitchen staff behind closed doors. And then, like a slow-motion film, I watched as Megan's face transformed, from polite interest to shock to something that looked terrifyingly like panic. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at Evelyn with the expression of someone seeing a ghost. In that moment, I knew they had met before, and whatever had transpired between them was about to explode like a long dormant landmine, right in the middle of my daughter's wedding day. "Mi perdo, pai. Eu no sabia." The silence in the ballroom seemed to stretch into infinity. I watched Megan's face, the blood draining from it, leaving her complexion as white as her wedding gown. Her new husband placed a protective hand on her lower back, confused by her reaction but sensing her distress. Evelyn stood gracefully in the spotlight, maintaining her composure even as the tension in the room thickened to something almost tangible. "Congratulations to the happy couple," Evelyn concluded smoothly, raising her champagne glass. "May your journey together be blessed with understanding, forgiveness, and love." The guests raised their glasses automatically, murmuring the toast, but their eyes darted between Megan, Evelyn, and me, hungry for the drama unfolding before them. The band, sensing the need to dispel the awkwardness, quickly launched into an upbeat number. Conversations resumed, but with a new undercurrent of excited whispers. Megan whispered something to Andrew, then turned and walked swiftly toward the exit. Not running, she had too much dignity for that, but moving with the determined stride of someone fleeing a fire. Without thinking, I followed her. "Gregory," Evelyn called softly, touching my arm. "I need to talk to her," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I'll be back." I caught up with Megan in the corridor outside the ballroom, where she stood with one hand braced against the wall, the other pressed to her stomach as if she might be ill. Her wedding gown, a cascade of ivory lace and silk that had likely cost more than my annual salary, seemed suddenly too heavy for her slender frame. "Megan," I said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She spun around, her eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears. For a moment I saw her as a child again, 6 years old, caught stealing cookies before dinner, her face a perfect picture of guilt and defiance. "Did you know?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you bring her here on purpose?" "Know what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Evelyn just told me you've met before, but she didn't explain." "Evelyn," she repeated, and something in the way she said the name made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Is that what she calls herself now? No Ms. Wells, CEO and heiress? No daughter of James Wells? I stood there, piecing it together slowly. "You knew who she was. Before today." Megan laughed, a brittle sound that held no humor. "Oh yes, Daddy. I knew exactly who she was. She glanced around, then grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Not here. There are too many ears. She led me down the corridor to a small bridal preparation room, now empty of bridesmaids and makeup artists. Wedding paraphernalia was scattered about. A veil draped over a chair, lipstick tubes on a vanity, an empty champagne bottle in an ice bucket. She closed the door behind us with a decisive click.
6 months ago, she began, pacing the small room, her wedding dress rustling with each agitated step. I attended the National Hotel Association conference in Atlanta. I was representing my company. We were pitching our software to several major hotel chains. She stopped, meeting my eyes in the vanity mirror. One of our target clients was Wells Hotel Group. I sank into a velvet armchair, beginning to understand. You met Evelyn there. Yes, but I didn't know she was your...
Megan struggled to find the word, settling on friend. What happened, Megan? She turned to face me directly, and I was struck by how much she looked like her mother in that moment. The same proud tilt of the chin, the same way of squaring her shoulders before delivering an unpleasant truth. I was seated next to her at a luncheon. We got to talking about hotel management software. She was intelligent, articulate, clearly knew the industry inside and out. I was making progress, thought I might actually land the account. She twisted her new wedding ring nervously. Then someone mentioned Charleston, and I said I was from there originally. I could see where this was headed, a slow-motion collision I was powerless to prevent. She asked about my family. I mentioned my mother worked in hotel management too. Then she asked about my father. Megan's voice tightened. I said some things, unflattering things, about me, I said softly. It wasn't a question. Megan nodded, unable to meet my eyes now. I called you useless, a has-been who couldn't keep up with the times. I said you were probably still moping around Charleston, feeling sorry for yourself. She swallowed hard. I said you were pathetic. Each word was a knife twist, but I forced myself to stay silent, to let her continue. She asked if that was really how I felt about my own father. I told her she had no right to judge me, that she didn't know what it was like to watch someone you once admired just give up on life. Megan's voice cracked. I called her a spoiled, entitled heiress. Said she'd probably never had to work for anything in her life, never had to watch someone she loved turn into a shadow. What did she say? I asked, barely able to form the words. Megan shook her head, a single tear tracking down her carefully made-up face. That's the thing, Daddy. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with such disappointment. Not anger, not offense. Just this profound sadness. Then she excused herself from the table. The next day, our proposal was rejected. She sank to her knees before me, the voluminous white dress pooling around her like spilled milk. Is she the woman with the candle holder? She asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. What? In your apartment before you moved out? There was a brass candle holder on your desk. Mom threw it against the wall during one of your fights. You spent hours fixing it, even though it was just an old piece of junk. I remembered that night, one of the last before Eleanor asked me to leave. I'd found the candle holder at an estate sale and had been drawn to its simple, elegant design. I'd bought it thinking someday I might give it to someone who would appreciate it. At the time, I'd had no idea who that might be. Yes, I admitted. She's the woman with the candle holder. Megan's face crumpled. Oh God, Daddy. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. She grasped my hands, her own trembling violently. I didn't know she was important to you. I didn't know you'd found someone. I really believed what Mom always said about you, that you'd never change, never grow, never find happiness again. I looked down at my daughter, this complex, flawed, beautiful human I had helped create, and felt the walls I'd built around my heart since that day in the courthouse begin to crumble. Forgive me, Dad, she whispered, tears now flowing freely. I didn't know. In that moment, I had a choice. I could hold on to my hurt, my righteous anger at how she'd treated me, or I could do what Evelyn had been teaching me all these months, that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, but about creating space for a different future. I reached out and gently wiped a tear from my daughter's cheek. There's a lot we didn't know about each other, Megan. Maybe it's time we started learning. Dawn broke over Charleston Harbor with a painter's touch, soft pinks and golds reflecting off the water, bathing the city in gentle light. I stood at the window of our hotel suite, watching the early morning ferry make its first crossing of the day. Behind me, Evelyn slept peacefully, Her dark hair spread across the white pillow like spilled ink. Last night, after my conversation with Megan, I'd returned to the reception to find Evelyn chatting amiably with an elderly couple, betraying no sign of the earthquake that had just rocked our world. She'd taken one look at my face and excused herself, leading me to a quiet corner. "She knows who you are," I'd said. "From before, from some hotel conference." Evelyn had nodded, her eyes holding mine steadily. "I know. You knew all along? That she was my daughter? That she had said those things about me?" "Yes." No excuses, no elaborate explanations, just that simple affirmation. "Why didn't you tell me?" She touched my face then, her palm cool against my cheek. "Because some truths need to be discovered, not told. This was between you and Megan. I just created the space for it to happen." I'd spent the rest of the reception in a daze, watching Megan dance with her new husband, seeing Eleanor across the room studiously avoiding my gaze, feeling the weight of decades of misunderstandings and unspoken words. Now, as the sun climbed higher over Charleston, I slipped out of the room quietly, leaving Evelyn to her dreams. There was somewhere I needed to go. St. Michael's Church in Charleston was older and grander than its namesake in Greensboro, a colonial masterpiece with a towering white steeple. I stood on its steps as the city came to life around me, shopkeepers raising awnings, early morning joggers pounding the historic pavements, restaurant staff accepting deliveries for the day ahead. I hadn't brought a candle, hadn't thought that far ahead when I'd walked out of the hotel on impulse, drawn to this place that echoed the site of our daily ritual in Greensboro. But as I sat on the church steps, trying to make sense of everything that had happened, I noticed a small figure approaching from the harbor side. Evelyn, wrapped in a light coat against the morning chill, a white candle in her hand. "How did you know where to find me?" I asked as she sat beside me. She smiled, that gentle sunrise smile that still made my heart skip. "Where else would you go? This is our place no matter what city we're in." She placed the candle on the step between us, and I noticed something unusual. There was writing on it, names carefully inscribed in Evelyn's elegant script. I leaned closer to read them. James Wells, Gregory Thompson, Megan Hayes. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "A new tradition," Evelyn replied, striking a match. The flame caught, flickering in the morning breeze. "In the old Catholic tradition, candles are lit for the souls of the departed, to light their way, but I've always thought the living need that light even more." She handed me a small embroidered handkerchief, not her usual one, but a new one. I unfolded it carefully. The familiar phrase was there, "Perdonare est vivere," but beneath it, she had added something new, "Et amare est renasci," and to love is to be reborn. "I've lit candles for my father for 6 years," she said, watching the flame dance in the morning light, asking his forgiveness. "But I've come to understand something, Gregory. Sometimes the person who most needs forgiveness isn't the one who's gone. It's ourselves." I thought of Megan kneeling before me in her wedding dress, tears streaking her makeup. I thought of Eleanor standing across the ballroom, her eyes finally meeting mine with something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't hatred either. I thought of myself, stepping off a bus in Greensboro, carrying nothing but shame and regret. "Megan told me something last night," I said, watching a seagull wheel overhead. "After you left the reception, she said she'd gone to find you, to apologize for what she'd said at that conference." Evelyn nodded. "She did. She said you told her you'd already forgiven her, that you'd forgiven her the moment she said those things about me." I turned to look at her, this extraordinary woman who had somehow seen value in a broken old man. "How? How could you forgive someone who spoke so cruelly about a person you care for?" "Because I recognized the pain behind her words," Evelyn said simply. "The same pain I carried for years after my father died. The pain of loving someone imperfectly, of failing them, of being failed by them." She reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. And because I knew, even then, that I was falling in love with her father, that someday we would all need to find our way back to each other, the revelation struck me like a physical blow. "You knew? Even back then?" She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Not consciously, perhaps, but when she spoke about you, even through her anger, I could hear the love underneath, the disappointment that only comes from caring deeply. I wanted to meet this man who had inspired such complicated feelings. She squeezed my hand. And then, by some miracle, you appeared on a bench outside my church. I sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she was saying. That our meeting hadn't been chance at all, but something more profound. A convergence of paths that had been moving toward each other all along. "What happens now?" I asked finally. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out another white candle, this one blank. "Now we write a new name," she said, offering me a pen, "for someone else who might need forgiveness, or understanding, or simply to be seen with compassion." I thought for a moment, then carefully wrote a name on the smooth wax surface. Eleanor. Evelyn smiled, adding the candle to our small collection on the church step. "And so it grows," she said softly, "our circle of light." As the morning sun climbed higher, casting the church steeple in gold, I understood what Evelyn had been teaching me all along. That forgiveness wasn't just about absolution for past wrongs. It was a living flame, a light to guide us forward into unknown territories, a beacon that said, "Here is the way home." Spring came to Greensboro like a whispered promise, dogwoods blooming in clouds of white, azaleas bursting into vibrant pink, the air sweet with the scent of new beginnings. 6 months had passed since Megan's wedding, 6 months of careful rebuilding between father and daughter. Weekly phone calls that had started awkwardly had gradually evolved into genuine conversations. She and Andrew had even visited us twice, tentative steps toward a relationship none of us had imagined possible back in that Charleston ballroom. Today, St. Michael's Church was transformed. No longer would Evelyn and I sit on its steps as outsiders, lighting candles before locked doors. Today, the doors stood open, welcoming us and the small group of guests who had gathered to witness something few had thought possible. The marriage of a 58-year-old failure to a 28-year-old heiress who had redefined the meaning of her inheritance. I stood at the altar, my hands fidgeting with the cuffs of my new suit. Not second-hand this time, but custom-made at Evelyn's insistence. Lou from the diner sat in the front row, beaming with pride as if I were his own son. Beside him was Mrs. Patterson, my landlady from the boarding house who had cried when I told her I was moving out. "About time someone recognized what a good man you are," she'd said, patting my cheek with her weathered hand. Andrew stood beside me as my best man. An unexpected choice perhaps, but Evelyn had suggested it as a bridge between my old life and new. "He's family now," she'd said simply, "and we're all learning how to be family together." The small church was filled with candles, hundreds of them, white tapers in brass holders lining the aisle, clustered on the altar, glowing in the windows. Each one bore a name, written in different hands. Some I recognized, the elderly couple from the art museum, Evelyn's assistant Robert, the barista from our favorite coffee shop. Others were strangers to me, names from Evelyn's world that had yet to become part of mine. But all were here, represented by these small flames, witnesses to this improbable moment. The organist began to play, not the traditional wedding march, but Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, the notes rising toward the vaulted ceiling like prayers. The guests stood, turning toward the door, and there she was. Evelyn wore not white, but a gown the color of candlelight, simple and elegant, her dark hair swept up with sprigs of white flowers. She carried no bouquet, but instead a single brass candle holder, the one I'd given her all those months ago on the church steps. But what caught my breath, what made my heart falter in my chest, was who walked beside her. Megan, radiant in deep blue, her arm linked through Evelyn's. And on Evelyn's other side, to my complete astonishment, was Eleanor, my ex-wife, the woman who had once told our daughter I would die alone, now escorting my bride down the aisle with a grace I wouldn't have thought possible. When they reached the altar, Megan kissed Evelyn's cheek and stepped to one side. Eleanor hesitated, then leaned in to whisper something in Evelyn's ear before taking her seat in the front row. "What did she say?" I murmured as Evelyn took her place beside me. "That she was wrong about you," Evelyn whispered back, her eyes shining. "And that she's glad she was." The ceremony itself was brief. Neither of us wanted long speeches or elaborate rituals. But when it came time for the vows, Evelyn surprised me. Instead of speaking, she turned to a small table beside the altar where 8 candles stood unlit. She took the first candle, inscribed with my name, and lit it from the altar candle. "For Gregory," she said, her voice clear in the hushed church, "who taught me that it's never too late to begin again." The second candle bore her father's name, For James, she said as she lit it, who couldn't understand my choices in life but gave me the strength to make them anyway. One by one, she lit the remaining candles, each with a name and a brief dedication. Her grandmother, who had trusted her with a legacy. Megan, who had found the courage to face her own mistakes. The elderly pastor from the Greensboro church, who had finally given Evelyn a key so she could place her candles inside. The baker from the shop near our apartment, whose kindness to a stranger had made Greensboro feel like home to me. The seventh candle was for Eleanor, for teaching Gregory to be the man I fell in love with, Evelyn said, looking directly at my ex-wife. Even if it was through difficult lessons. I heard Eleanor's sharp intake of breath, saw her hand rise to her throat in a gesture of surprise, then a small nod of acknowledgement, a truce declared in the soft light of the candle bearing her name. The final candle Evelyn picked up was inscribed with her own name. She held it out to me along with a matchbook. I understood then what she wanted. With hands steadier than I would have thought possible, I struck the match and lit her candle. For Evelyn, I said, finding my voice at last, who showed me that forgiveness isn't just about the past. It's about making room for a future none of us could have imagined. She placed the candle alongside the others, then turned to face our guests. We all need forgiveness, she said simply, and we all need love. Sometimes they're the same thing. Then she turned back to me, taking both my hands in hers. No more words were necessary. The pastor pronounced us husband and wife, and as I leaned down to kiss my bride, I saw in the corner of my eye that Megan was crying. But they were different tears than the ones she'd shed in that bridal room in Charleston. These were tears of healing, of something broken being made whole again. At the reception held in the small garden behind the church, Eleanor approached us. She looked older than I remembered, or perhaps just more human now that she was no longer the villain in my story. I underestimated you, Greg, she said, using the nickname from our early years together. I thought when life knocked you down, you'd stay down. I nearly did, I admitted, if I hadn't gotten on that particular bus, on that particular night. But you did, she said with a small smile. And that makes all the difference, doesn't it? Later, as twilight deepened into evening and the garden glowed with strings of tiny lights, I found myself alone with Evelyn for a moment. She had removed her shoes, her bare feet in the grass, her face tilted up to the emerging stars. Happy? I asked, slipping my arm around her waist. Beyond words, she replied, leaning into me. Do you know what today is? I thought for a moment. April 15th? It's the 365th day since you returned my handkerchief, she said. A full year of candles. I thought of all the candles we'd lit together, for grief, for remembrance, for hope, for forgiveness. Each one a small light against the darkness, a declaration that love persists even when everything else falls away. I'll never extinguish a white candle again, I told her, kissing her temple. Not as long as I live. She smiled up at me, that sunrise smile that had saved me when I was drowning in darkness. Because each one carries a story, she said, including ours. Especially ours, I whispered, as the stars came out one by one above us, eternal flames in the infinite dark. Life has a way of burying us before our time, with cruel words, broken promises, and the weight of others' expectations. But as Gregory's story shows, sometimes what feels like an ending is merely a door to something extraordinary. What would you have done in his place? Would you have had the courage to step onto that bus to nowhere? Would you have opened your heart again after it had been so thoroughly broken? The candles Evelyn lit weren't just for the dead. They were beacons for the living, reminding us that forgiveness isn't just about absolving the past. It's about making space for a future we can't yet imagine. Perdonare es vivere. To forgive is to live. When was the last time you lit a candle for someone who hurt you? When was the last time you allowed yourself to be the light in someone else's darkness? If this story touched your heart, remember that second chances aren't just for fairy tales, or the young, or the wealthy. They're for anyone brave enough to place a candle in the window and believe that someone, somewhere, will see its light. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to begin again. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the extraordinary courage of ordinary hearts. And let us know in the comments, what white candle will you light today?